The hero enters the room slowly. He stops dramatically. All you see is his silhouette. But how do you already know who this hero is?
Let's learn about that.
There are many things that can make a film memorable, whether it's how a cinematographer lights a scene or a specific actor's portrayal of a character, but we want to focus on one area in particular, and that's how a film can reach pop culture status through iconic costume design.
Start the engine! Get it up!
This is as close as you can get to the original fedora used in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Now that's interesting, David, you call it a fedora. Of course, when I think of fedora, I think of the classic style, like the Humphrey Bogart of the 20s and 30s, maybe even 40s. This is very distinct from that style.
At that time, hats were a symbol of social status in many regards. The lower working class wore the short, flat caps, like the newsy hats. Moving up, we have the higher upper class wearing, really nice top hats and bowler hats. And then for everyone in the middle class, your college professors, people in marketing, people who worked in offices, you wore a fedora.
So no doubt at that point in time, the fedora was incredibly popular, the 20s, 30s, 40s, but still I think about the iconic look of Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca or Maltese Falcon, for example. It was a very different style fedora. So how did we get from that old classic style to something a little bit more like this?
When you go back to the original concept art that was done for Indiana Jones, it really all appeared in that art as it did in the movie. You had a fedora, you had a leather jacket, a bullwhip in a lot of them. The inspiration for a lot of that can be drawn back to earlier serial action films that you would see on Saturday mornings, or to some of the classic adventures like Treasure of the Sierra Madre and Secret of the Incas.
Friday night. If we don't get this, we don't get the shot.
If we don't get the shot, we don't get the movie.
So late 70s come around, or early 80s, and Spielberg and his team want to create a look resembling an action figure from the earlier mid-30s. So obviously they want to get some sort of fedora. What was their approach to getting this unique look?
When Deborah Nadoolman Landis was picking out the parts of Indiana Jones' costume, she had seen the Poet hat, which was a hat done by Savile Row's Herbert Johnson's hat makers. Savile Row is a district in London that is known for its very expensive, very well-made clothing. And it stood out to her because it was an Australian cut. So the crown was a little bit taller, the brim was a little bit wider than a more traditional hat from England or America would have been at that time. It made the wearer immediately recognizable and stood out from all the other characters in the film because everyone wore a fedora, but it made you know that this fedora was Indiana Jones's.
Indiana Jones.
As you can see with how the brim sits, is part of this actually comes from Harrison Ford's own involvement on how he chose to wear the hat. The way that it swoops up slightly at the back, and as well as the very tightly pinched crown here, were things that he did himself as part of the hat. That's not something that was originally came that way.
And that was done so it had, I don't know, maybe more of a personal touch?
Yeah, I think so. The idea with them was that they were lived in. When he's out adventuring with these are what he wears for a week at a time. He sleeps in them, he eats in them, he adventures in them, so they're very lived in.
This jacket, I read you aged this jacket the night before the shoot with...
Yeah, because I had a huge problem. Only one jacket was ready for the first day of shooting.
Wow.
And the first day of shooting was La Rochelle, France. And I carried it in my own luggage, and it was brand new, right from Berman's. I brought sandpaper, I brought mineral oil, I brought shoe polish, I had a suede brush. And so with those things, I aged it for the following day.
She sat on the pool with Harrison Ford, and she spent hours going at the hat and the coat, distressing them, making them more lived in. She would take the hat and she would crush it, and then she'd sit on it a little bit. And so it has this more lived-in feel. It's a hat that's been around and that Indy has been using for the past 10 years. And it's his companion that's been with him that whole time.
We've seen how a film like Indiana Jones takes an everyday object like a fedora and makes it incredibly memorable. But there's also a lot of other films that do that as well. I think of the sunglasses from Morpheus, an everyday object tweaked in a small way that makes it immediately recognizable to anyone who knows the film, and maybe even people who just know it through osmosis, through word of mouth.
Or the ruby slippers used in The Wizard of Oz.
Dorothy's ruby slippers are a great example. They are a one-of-a-kind piece of film memorabilia that everyone around the world can recognize because it's so well known from the classic golden age of film.
They're at the Smithsonian.
They're at the
You can see them.
Smithsonian.
I've seen them. It is an experience to be with an object like that. When you're that close to something that has affected so many people, and so many people can have memories about when was the first time you saw The Wizard of Oz, or felt that wonder of going into a world full of color. Being close to something like that is a magical experience.
When a filmmaker is able to take something like slippers and land it in the Smithsonian, that's something truly special. And when a costume designer can take an everyday object like a fedora and get kids all over the world to instantly recognize their hero, well, that's movie magic.